Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 855-450-6624. Send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. So Steve, my co-host, is off gallivanting on a work assignment. And so he's not joining me. But you can at 855-450-NOAH. It's 855-450-6624 or the email live@asknoahshow.com. You can also join us in the chat room, Geek Lab, pound Geek Lab, /linuxdelta.com on Matrix, or join in the web browser, geeklab.ninja. A 386 pocket computer. The original was the Book 8088. It was a recreation of the original 1981 IBM PC inside of a chunky clamshell laptop. Now, the people behind that are also responsible with a Hand 386. It's a bit like a late 80s PC stuck inside of an old Palm Pilot or BlackBerry. And the second revision of the Book 8088 is built with more ports, VGA-capable graphics adapter, and a basic CGA adapter. Well, those same people are now back with the Pocket 386. It combines the Hand 386 style internals with a clamshell design similar to the Book 8088. The result is a kind of IBM compatible system that would have been common during the Windows 3.1 era. To be honest with you, it reminds me most of the Toshiba Libretto. If you ever had or knew what the Toshiba Libretto, specifically the 70 CT, it was essentially a small little pocket-style computer, not unlike the GPD Pocket, but it ran a full-blown desktop operating system at the time, Windows 95. So the Pocket 386, same style, folding clamshell, handheld-like device, but can run Windows 95. Now, I know what you're thinking. Noah, it is 2024. What am I supposed to do with a 386 with 4 megabytes of RAM running Windows 95? Play with it. It's a toy. In the same thing that is appealing to me about older game consoles is what appeals to me about this sort of technology, because it's maintainable, because it can be around for years to come. One of my kids has started to get into Pokemon, and the original Pokemon game, and comes out to the kitchen and says to me, "Dad, do you know how easy it was for me to get Pokemon to run on my computer?" And I said, "No, tell me." All I had to do was open Lutris and say that I want to play it, and it downloads the emulator. And I went online and found a ROM file, and now I'm playing Pokemon. And it hit me like that, instantaneously. I thought, that will not be the case 25 years from now. The games that are coming out today that are filled with DRM, that you can't really install outside of some sort of authenticated platform that has to stream the game files off of the internet somewhere. Certainly creative people will be creative, and there's going to be some workarounds for some of the games, but there's absolutely going to be a whole swath of software and games that 20 years from now, our kids will say, "Oh, I played this when I was a kid," or I had so much fun digging into this with a LAN party or a sleepover, whatever it is, and they won't be able to do those things because they won't exist anymore. And if they don't exist, there's no way to back them up. The nice thing about those ROM files, because they came on physical cartridges, you could read them off and you could store the files and you run them anytime. So 20 years later, my kids are playing some of the same games that I'm playing. A lot of those games ran on 386. There's a lot of DOS games. There's a lot of 3.1 games. There's a lot of Windows 95 games. In my neck of the woods, there's actually a component for the electrical system that runs throughout the city. And those components are still running, so basically a controller for the transformers, are still running basically a Windows 98 DOS-based version of software. And so you have to have an older Windows computer in order to be able to interface and talk to these things. And so there's actually a company that designs these older Windows computers to be able to use to talk to these outdated devices. And so I look at stuff like this, and I think of the Pocket 386, and I go, that's a really cool way to, if you had some sort of esoteric use case scenario, to do that, but also to go find, the original, Duke Nukem 3D or Math Blaster or some of these really cool older games that ran on DOS-based systems, and the ability to drag them into 2024 for cheap. It's $200. So it's available for sale right now on AliExpress. I'll have a link for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. But you can go get yourself a full-on 386 laptop. You can use it for retro gaming. You could use it for just a fun toy, a fun blast from the past. I invite you to check it out. You can learn more, podcast.asknoahshow.com. The Tor browser 13.5 open source web browser has been released. Browse without being tracked. Now, there's a huge debate around this. You'll find this on Reddit. You'll find this in chat rooms. You'll find this anywhere that somebody's talking about security and privacy. If you ask, what's the most private and secure way to browse the internet? If you ask 10 people, you get 20 answers, right? Nobody really agrees on how to do that. So the argument largely breaks down into essentially two camps. One camp is the Tor people, and the other camp is the VPN people. In the VPN camp, people will tell you, well, it's easier to get set up. There's a wider range of providers. It's an understood and well circulated technology, and so there are companies that are designed to purely get you connected to the internet in a private way. Against Tor, what the VPN people will tell you is that the FBI has used ways to compromise Tor users, and so it's not a completely foolproof method. On the flip side, and quite honestly, the camp that I fall into, I don't disagree that there are absolutely cases in which the FBI has found exploits against Tor. One of the things that stands out to me, and if somebody in the audience, if you're hearing this and you say, oh no, I have the answer to that, I would love for you to write in at live@asknoahshow.com, but find me a case where the FBI exposes their methods. Because one of the things that I have noticed every time I go to dig into a case where somebody was caught using Tor and they're trying to pin something on them, when push comes to shove and their choice is to either expose their methods in open court or drop the case, they drop the case. And that tells me two things. It is possible to exploit Tor, but it's very difficult to exploit Tor, and there aren't a lot of ways to exploit Tor, which is why they're hesitant to give up the ways that they have that are working. One of the things that is problematic for any web browsing technology is fingerprinting. Fingerprinting works the following. There is a certain amount of information, a lot actually, that we can ascertain from a client device. When you go to visit a website, if we're asking, we can determine all sorts of things like the screen resolution that you're using, like the amount of memory that is available. In certain cases, you can see some of the CPU things. And and as technology has become more advanced, it has become harder and harder to defend against. There's a website run by the EFF. It's called Cover Your Tracks. You can learn more at coveryourtracks.eff.org. And basically, you visit the site and you click Test Your Browser, and it tries to fingerprint you the same way other sites would try to fingerprint you. And then it will give you a score based on how private you are. Now, I have followed Kevin Mitnick's recommendation to disable cookies. I have my browser set in private mode, or in incognito browsing, or private mode, however you want to put it. Every time the browser restarts, it's Firefox. I block ads. I block invisible trackers. And yet, when I go to coveryourtracks.eff.org, my browser has a unique fingerprint. I ran it before the show, and the evaluation that I got was, quote, your browser fingerprint appears to be unique under 179,341 tested in the last 41 days. Currently, we estimate that your browser has a fingerprint that conveys at least 17.45 bits of identifying data. The measurements we use to obtain this result are listed below. You can read more, and then it gives you a detailed report. Things like your user agent, the operating system that I'm using, the browser that I'm using, and digs into in detail what it can tell about my machine. It's a difficult thing to defend against. Well, the latest version of Tor, they've introduced something called letterboxing. And the letterboxing section in the general section allows the user to find the options to force the browser to remember the last known window size, as well as to choose the alignment of the letterbox, either the top, the middle, or the middle of the browser. And the idea here was, a few versions back, they started standardizing the resolution that Tor displays at. So no matter what you put your window at, it presents a consistent resolution to the side looking. So when they ask, is this a unique, canvas, all Tor looks the same. Well, that presents a real problem because the implementation of letterboxing works to prevent against fingerprinting. The problem is it looks like garbage, right? Nobody wants to see part of their screen or you can't see the rest of it. And so it was interpreted as a bug by a lot of people using Tor. So the latest version, Tor 13.5, attempts to fix that by allowing you to specify some of those, exactly where that letterboxing is placed. And so you can have it in the middle of the screen, you can have it at the top, whatever you want to do. But all that to say, if you're interested in privacy, highly recommend using Tor. It's not a walk in the park from the standpoint that it's fine, easy enough to get up and running. If you're on Ubuntu, I think they have it in the App Store, so you can just download it. They have a thing you can download straight off their website and use it. And of course, you can use Tails, which we'll get to in just a second. The real problem with Tor becomes many sites don't like traffic from Tor because they interpret it as malicious, because sometimes it is. And so you're going to find a whole bunch of sites that are problematic, particularly if you work in an industry like healthcare or any sort of government thing. They want you to expose your IP address and who you are so that they can positively identify you. And if they can't do that, they become suspicious of your traffic. And so it can be difficult to go. But even things like Amazon and buying things online become difficult. Credit card payment processors. If you ever have that little box that pops up and it's doing an API call to your bank and says, hey, we're going to text you, a lot of times that will just bust if it's on Tor. So good and the bad, I encourage everybody to use it from the standpoint that, particularly if you want it to become more mainstream and you want it to become more accepted, put more traffic on it. And then it becomes harder to shut those people out because, hey, there's all these customers are using it. Along with the latest edition of Tor is Tails. Now, if you haven't heard of Tails, Tails is an amnesic incognito live system. It's a distro specifically designed to be ephemeral. So you plug the USB drive into your computer, you boot it up, it boots into Tails, you do what you're going to do, and then you shut the computer down and it's gone. It includes unique features like the automatic wiping of memory. So in the event that somebody tries to physically take your laptop away from you, if you are simply to remove the USB flash drive, it will instantly launch into a mode in which it starts actively erasing the memory. So what that prevents is somebody from using software to extract the contents of memory after they've taken the laptop out of your possession. 6.4 has been released, and with the latest stable release, it's based on Debian and protects against surveillance and censorship. The highlights of 6.4 include the ability to store a random seed on the USB stick to strengthen all cryptography. Quote, the devs say that having a secure random number generator is critical for all various Tails components that rely on cryptography, such as persistent storage, Tor, and HTTPS. 6.4 also switches to secure HTTPS addresses for the Debian and Tails apt software repo rather than using the Onion addresses. And it updates the Tor web browser Anonymous Web to version 13.0.16. Updates to the Tor client 0.4.12, and updates to Mozilla Thunderbird email client are using 115.12.0. So if you are listening to this and you're like, man, I really kind of want to go play with Tor, but I don't really know how to do that, or I don't really want to install it, or I don't have a computer to install it, or anything like that. Tails is a great way to do that because you download it, you put it onto a flash drive, you boot into it, you can play with it for as long as you're going to play with it, and then when you're done, you just drop it off and you're done. You don't have to worry about it. You throw it back and the computer goes back to doing what it ordinarily does. I have an old laptop, and what I did with this old laptop was I repurposed it specifically for the purpose of using Tor. So I took, not Tor, Tails. So I took the laptop and I actually destroyed the storage interface on the motherboard, so it's impossible to insert storage into it. I then set up my Tails disk, and it just sits inside of a little briefcase. And when I want it, I take the laptop out, and it's got one of those little stubby flash drives that just barely are larger than the USB port, if you know what I'm talking about. Put that guy in there and fire the laptop up. It boots into Tails. I browse the internet, look up the things I want to look up, download the information I want to download, and then shut the laptop, and then it goes back. And so that's been kind of the secure communication computer, so to speak. So if you haven't checked it out, it's Tails 6.4. It's available. I have a link for you in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. When SIP came out, I was extraordinarily excited because it literally meant that you were going to get away from the Avayas and the Ciscos of the world, and you were going to get to a place where you could own your own communication infrastructure. And so early on, I remember it was at a LinuxCon. And there was a guy, and he was giving a presentation about this brand new software called Asterisk. And Asterisk was going to be an open source implementation of the SIP protocol and allow you to run on GNU/Linux a SIP server. And from that time, from the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, this is going to be the bee's knees. Because prior to that, I had been working with other VoIP technology. And before VoIP, I'd been working with proprietary Avaya systems, and they work well. They work well enough, and businesses are happy with them. But, you're all one or all the other. You want to go from an Avaya system over to a Cisco system, you got to rip the whole darn thing out, and you got to start over. The new controller, new phones, every extension, the whole 9 yards. So SIP was wildly cool because it was a protocol for doing voice over IP, but it was an open standard. And so anybody could adopt it, anybody could use it. And as I correctly predicted, way back when, it was going to take over the voice industry, and it absolutely has. And today, it is the standard used by almost every VoIP communication platform out there. Additionally, manufacturers have started to make every device known to man, from loudspeakers to cordless phones, to high-quality speakerphones, to cheap $30 SIP phones that you can buy off of the Jungle Store. All of them available because of an open standard. Many of you, to include myself, have been using a software called 3CX to host our phone systems. And the reason that 3CX was amazing was that it allowed you to just ship phones. 3CX runs a provisioning server, and effectively, they work with manufacturers of various phones so that they embed their software into the firmware such that when the phone boots up, the first thing it does is it asks, here's my MAC address. Do I have a 3CX instance? If yes, it automatically reaches out to that 3CX instance and asks for its configuration file, and 3CX pulls the configuration file down. That's huge because particularly if you have clients that live in other states, like we have clients that live in other states, and they say, hey, my phone went down, we tell them, go to the Jungle Store, order yourself a new phone, send us a MAC address, or we just order the phone, take the MAC address, and ship the phone directly to them. And without ever touching the phone, we put the MAC address into 3CX, tell them to press and hold the OK button, wait 5 seconds, and the phone reboots, and now it's their extension. It's like magic. It's fantastic. It's awesome. It's cool. It does all the things. Great. With version 20, 3CX will no longer be supporting direct SIP stun. What that means is for the last 10 plus years, we have lived in a world in where SIP being an open standard has allowed people to connect to a phone system with only 3 things: the SIP server, the username, and the password. And if you had those 3 things, you were able to log into a SIP server, make and receive phone calls. Simple, awesome, worked, was great. Now, were there problems? There were absolutely problems. No matter how long your password is, if you hammer at it long enough, people are able to break into it. And oftentimes people didn't make good passwords. And so you wound up with every problem under the sun, people compromising SIP credentials and then making long distance calls and doing all sorts of things. And there were all sorts of horror stories of people running up, huge bills and huge charges and stuff. So there were absolutely problems. Additionally, because its SIP connects over a specific port, it is quite easy for companies like AT&T and Verizon to say, well, hold on a cotton picking second. We sell voice services. If everybody has SIP phones, then they won't buy voice services from us. We should block those things. And so there was all sorts of shenanigans over the years of these companies making it increasingly difficult for you to use SIP services across their networks. One of the most notable irritations was Google came out with a way to natively add a SIP account to the dialer. So you could use the native echo cancellation built into the phone, the native dialer app, the native phone, everything just worked. But instead of making a call over the cellular network, it would actually transition that over SIP. That was even more appealing when the big name carriers went away from actual cell phones and went over to, from CDMA over to LTE. So now your voice calls are actually going over a data network the exact same way that a SIP server would be going over your own SIP server. And so what ended up happening was you would have all these problems from business owners saying, I can't get my extension to log in from my cell phone, or I'm on hotel Wi-Fi and I can't. To address all of that, 3CX had a really neat feature that basically tunnels from their app back to the 3CX server and allows you to connect. So even though you're still connecting with just a username, a password, and a SIP server, it additionally supported this functionality to tunnel the traffic back over through, if you use their app, tunnel the traffic back directly to the server. If you wanted to set that up in an office, they offered something called the SBC. The SBC was essentially a piece of software that you installed on any Debian box. You could run it on a VM, you could run it on a Raspberry Pi, and you would point your phones to that address as the SIP server. It then created the same similar tunnel situation that takes it back to the actual 3CX server, and you're able to log in. Bob's your uncle. No more ability for networks or hotel Wi-Fi or anything else to cut you off. And for years, that has been an absolutely stellar solution. It has allowed all sorts of businesses and all sorts of executives to work from anywhere they need to work for and log into their extension without problems. So it's been really great. On the other hand, I don't like the 3CX app is fine, but I'm always hesitant when I only have one choice. Additionally, they don't have a 3CX app for your laptop. So if you want to use 3CX on your laptop, you got to use either their web client, which I hate having stuff in the web browser because I use the web browser for, browsing the web. So I use LinPhone, which worked great with 3CX and has for years. And that has been my primary extension. Well, version 20, they are disabling or discontinuing the ability to log in with direct SIP, meaning that LinPhone only will work if you're also running an SBC either on your laptop directly or in a VM. Additionally, all of these phones that are designed towards a standard SIP system will no longer work, and instead, you're going to have to purchase from one of their phones listed at 3cx.com/SIP-phones. Largely, it comes down to three manufacturers: Fanvil, which are Chinese phones, Yealink, which are also Chinese phones, or Snome, which are German-made. I am beyond frustrated with this decision. Beyond frustrated. In the most immediate sense, I've had clients call me and go, so we have X amount of offices, or we have X amount of things. How are we supposed to, who's absorbing the cost to buy all these SBCs? And some of you are going, but no, it's just a Raspberry Pi. I mean, how much? Okay, fine. Yeah, it's the Pi, and then it's the power supply, and then it's the case, and then it's the SD card, and then you got to pay somebody to flash Debian onto the SD card, and then you got to install the SBC, then you got to add the SBC into 3.6, then you got to drive out there and plug the thing in, then you got to go point all their phones to connect through the SBC as opposed to connecting to 3.6. I mean, it takes a hot minute, is what I'm trying to say. And there's a significant cost associated when you have a number of clients. The other thing that comes into play here, you know who to this day, the two biggest players in most major offices are? Polycom and Cisco, both of which allow for SIP integration. Different ways. Cisco would very much like you to use their unified communication system. However, they have SIP firmware that you can flash onto their phones. So when you're going in to bid a job and you say, oh yeah, we got 350 extensions. Okay, no problem. What do you have? Well, I got Cisco, blah. Okay, great, awesome. We'll download the SIP, we'll download the K version of the software, we flash SIP on there, it'll be fine. What do you have? Polycom. Great, no problem. We factory reset them, we log into them, we point them towards the SIP server. Bob's your uncle, we're good to go. Guess which phones don't have native support for what they call a router phone? A router phone is basically the SBC built into the phone itself. Polycom and Cisco. So, biggest players in the game and no real support. The other thing that comes to light here, businesses often already have their phones. Sometimes they're Avaya, sometimes they're Cisco, sometimes they're Polycom, sometimes they are Yealing, sometimes they're Fanville. You don't know exactly what you're going to get, but the places that we as IT companies are bidding against are increasingly the ISP themselves. The ISP themselves are going to these businesses and going, hey, Mr. Business Lady, ma'am, sir, you pay us for internet and you pay us for phones. What you want to go to this new IP fancy schmancy phone thing, instead of going over there to, a third provider, how about we just give you the service and put it in? And so those people ask, what am I going to have to do for phones? And they go, no problem, boss. We give you a SIP username, a SIP password, and a SIP server, and we can reuse all of your existing phones. Then I'm supposed to come in as a 3CX guy and go, yeah, you got three choices, 2 Chinese phones or a German phone. What about these phones that we have? Sorry, throw them out, get a new one. Why? They don't have router phones in them. Okay, what's my other option? Well, you have to put in an SBC. Well, we have 14 branch offices. Tough luck. You need one in every office. So limited support. It's really limited to Gigaset, Grandstream, Polycom. And they have, so the fully supported ones, Fanville, Yealing, Snow, they have limited support for Gigaset, Polycom, Grandstream, and Cyberdata. But again, Polycom and Cisco not even mentioned, are one of the biggest players in there. It's about being cheap and easy rather than being about free and open. So we have moved from this idea of one open protocol that anybody can get to, well, we can buy these Fanville phones or we can buy these Yealing phones for literally $35 on Jungle. Why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I do that? And particularly if I'm competing with the ISP, why wouldn't I do that? Your choice is to install a piece of equipment on the customer's network, which presents another problem, right? There are a certain amount of people that go, no. We've got phones. That's fine. Why do you need this other on-premise box? I thought the whole idea was cloud hosted, this, that, or the other. That's what the ISP is telling me they can do for me. And then here we are sitting there like a stooge going, well, yeah, unfortunately, not a great move, 3CX. In fact, this is an abysmal move. So at this point, we have so many clients that are on 3CX, it would be impractical to try to get them all off or to move before the upgrade to V20. So for now, I'm just going to ride that train. However, if this doesn't come out of my mouth once a week, I'd be shocked at Alta Speed. And that is, if we are using a proprietary piece of software or a proprietary solution for a thing, it's a placeholder. It isn't a permanent thing because we can't really rely on it. And that was kind of my attitude toward 3CX. But again, as long as I can use LinPhone on my laptop, in the end, phones, by the nature of them being connected to a wider phone network, are never going to be completely ownable, right? Like, to a degree, 3CX is just the thing, or any phone system is just the thing that connects my individual extension to the wider phone network, which I will never be able to own because the whole function is to connect with other people. So if you look at it from that perspective, it becomes slightly less egregious to say, well, I'll use this proprietary thing on the side as long as the thing that I'm using on my end is open source, or I have at least the ability to use an open source thing on my end. Add to that, if you have SIP username, password, and SIP server, what do I care? It's different things I'm entering into the boxes. So I largely didn't put too much up of a stink, but this is a step too far. So a couple of options. The first is the hardware-based approach. So Grandstream is an American company that makes really decent budget VoIP stuff. I really like them. And one of the devices they make is something called the UCW. The UCW is a physical box for $218. And you install the physical box and you log into it. And so far as I understand it, it's actually free PBX under the hood, or excuse me, asterisk under the hood. They just have their own little fancy web UI. But you buy it with a one-time cost of $218, and you're back to give it a host name, give it a SIP username, give it a SIP password, and you can log extensions in. It also supports plugging in analog lines. So if you're coming from a place where you have an analog phone line, it has both an FXX and an FXO port. In other words, it has an ATA to feed back analog devices, and it has an ingest for analog lines. If you have a copper line, if you've been listening to past few episodes, we kind of touched on this. If you have a copper line, I would suggest in the strongest possible terms not to disconnect it. And instead, use something like a UCM to get that physical copper line onto the internet in the form of a SIP trunk. From there, you're able to use it just like you would use any other SIP trunk. And there's nothing stopping you from getting additional SIP trunks from a place like Voxtelesys. And so then you can have it go you can even have it primarily go over Voxtelesys, but then in the event that doesn't work, it falls back to the copper line. But so long as you still have access to it, if they're ripping them out all over the country and don't have them, if you still have one, you have an agreement, hang on to it, buddy, because there's no getting it back. The other thing that Grandstream makes that I came across just in my perusing through the situation, they make the WP825 IP Wi-Fi phone. Now, there are a couple of ways to do cordless phones. One way to do a cordless phone, and the most popular way to do well, let me back up. What doesn't work is we took this protocol known as Bluetooth that was originally designed to connect keyboards and mice to computers. And then we tried to shoehorn high-quality voice through it. And in order to do that, we've come up with all sorts of audio encoding algorithms to try to get as much voice quality as we can packed through this protocol that was never designed to do voice. The better way to do that, and indeed the way that people who live on the phone all day long, every day do it, is with something called Detect. And Detect is essentially a system that is actually back from the original cordless phone days, 900 megahertz cordless phone days, that allows a wireless communication from the handset back to the charger base station. In the IP phone sense, it uses Detect to get the wireless communication from the handset back to the base station. Then the base station itself is what's doing the SIP credentialing into the SIP server. So the base station logs in with the SIP username password. The wireless phone is actually just streaming wireless voice from itself. It's not passing IP packets, passing wireless voice from itself to the base station, which is then incorporated into the which is then passed on to the internet. But the thing that is so cool about this Grandstream cordless phone is it takes somewhat of a different approach, where the phone itself is actually the thing logging into the SIP server. So you put the SIP hostname, username, and password right into the phone. Because it's a Wi-Fi phone, it's using your existing wireless access points as opposed to the little base station. So you wander too far from the base station, your call's going to drop. In this case, the WP825 will roam from access point to access point, and the only thing the base station is doing is simply charging the phone. The cool thing that I like about it is anytime you're going from one access point to the other, there's always going to be a slight bit of network drop. Now, when it's somebody streaming a video and you can buffer a certain amount of the video, you don't really notice. It just drop from one, you go to another. If you're downloading a file, it's TCP, and so it just keeps doing the retries until it picks up and says, okay, I got reestablished connection. Again, you don't really notice. It just takes a little bit longer. Real-time voice communication, there's no such thing, right? You can't go back in time and insert voice packets. So if you drop the voice packets, part of that conversation is just lost, and then the person on one end or the other misses it. As you begin to approach the end of the access point, the device uses something called RSSI to determine when it's going to make the hop to the next access point. As the signal degradation begins to increase and the RSSI gets to the point that it's saying, hey, I'm ready to make a pop, it plays an audible beep in your ear so you know, hey, I'm approaching the end of Wi-Fi coverage of this access point. If I keep walking, I'm going to have, and it's less than a second, it's super fast, but I'm going to have just a momentary lapse. If I'm at a critical point in my conversation where I can't tolerate a small little gap, hang back a second, finish the conversation, then walk as we're waiting for the pregnant pause for the other person to respond, whatever it is, right? But it gives you that indication on the phone itself. So where all this kind of comes together for me is I am slowly trying to move my way away from cell phones. To do that, my process has been I've moved myself onto my laptop. I'm using LinPhone to place audio calls. I'm using jmp.chat for my personal calls and for my texts. And this allows me to get back to a portable nature of I have a device. There is no Signal 7. It's not communicating with any cell phone towers. There's no monthly fee because it's only using Wi-Fi. But when I want to place a phone call, I have a physical device that's built as a telephone designed to make a phone call. It's $165 and it works natively with any sort of open SIP standard I want to use. So wasn't directly relevant to my migration away from 3CX and onto FreePBX, but a really, really cool device nonetheless. The other device that I have come across, and I actually just installed one of these for a client, so now I can speak from a position of experience. It is the FXO Gateway, again from Grandstream. So this device is a box that you plug in analog phone lines and then it exposes them as a SIP trunk. It was useful for a client that ran a business between the United States and Canada in which his whole business is taking and receiving calls from Canada. And as a part of doing that, the delay that was imposed by using a SIP provider here in the United States meant that the calls were significantly delayed. Additionally, because everybody had his original phone number and because there is a federal law in place that allows small phone carriers in rural towns to be able to not port numbers, he was at a point to where he was paying long distance charging to get these Canadian calls forwarded to his U.S. number. It's a long story, but the short version is we installed one of these Grandstream FXO gateways and exposed it as a SIP trunk to his 3CX system. And now when people call his physical copper analog line, it rings his IP phone system and he's able to take calls just like you ordinarily would. So those things, park them in your toolbox. A couple of alternatives to 3CX. I'll be honest with you, these first three, not really a fan. I'm pointing them out mostly because they exist and I think it's worthy of discussion. So if you're listening to this, you're like, no, I use that one and it's great. I want to hear from you. If you hear that and you go, no, I use that and that's absolutely no better than 3.6, has all the same problems, I want to hear that too. They are Vodia, VODIA. You can learn more at web.vodia.com. Vital PBX. You can learn more at vitalpbx.com. And Yeastar. You can learn more at Yeastar, YEAstar.com. We'll have links for you for all of those in the show notes, but essentially they're what I understand to be equivalents of 3.6 insofar as they give you a proprietary thing that you can host and then run your own phone system and then connect phone to them. So it works. So far as I can tell, they don't play the games of, you have to have this special piece of equipment or you have to install the special piece of software, anything like that. They're just able to connect to them. So it seems like it's maybe one step above 3CX at this point. But again, I'm not going from one placeholder to another placeholder. If 3CX is going to hose me, I'll just move off of it altogether and I'll go back to FreePBX. I didn't really have a problem with it. So at the last time that I used Asterix, Asterix is the core system runs at the bottom. Above that is a web UI called FreePBX, and it has every feature under the sun known to man, including the ones that you would ordinarily have to pay for. With 3CX, they're included for free with FreePBX. So I think it's fantastic. The problems that I ran into with Asterix were a couple. One is, again, you're dealing with carriers and service providers and ISPs that, for whatever reason, block SIP traffic or make it difficult. And so I've dealt with that with hotel Wi-Fi. There are problems, okay? The second thing is it was never really designed to be run on the open internet. And so as a part of that, people would hack into those boxes and it just got to be a game of whack-a-mole. Oh, this box got popped. Okay, try and shut it down. This box gets popped. Try and shut it down. Of course, when they get in, they get the SIP username and the passwords, and then they use those to make long-distance calls. And so then you got clients that are upset because they're running up bills. It's a nightmare. It really is. It can be a nightmare. So all of those reasons caused me to leave Asterisk and FreePBX in the first place, they had a distro that combined the FreePBX UI with the Asterisk underpinning, and they called it Asterisk Now. Asterisk Now is still around. They've just renamed it FreePBX, and now it's run, so far as I can tell, by Sangoma, the people who are primarily funding a lot of the development for FreePBX. So I downloaded about a month ago the latest version of FreePBX. It's FreePBX 16, and I was pleasantly surprised. A refreshed UI. All of the options are available, so they don't have this thing where you get to use the options for 30 days and then they shut it down or whatever. Any of the core things are there. They do have some business add-on modules, but none of them are what I would consider essential or core services. You can use like ring groups. You can use any of the things that you would need to set up your system are all available there. And even some of the ones that are like just niceties. So like the administrator, they have an administrator module and it lets you do cleaner things. It gives you kind of like a nice dashboard for administrating the system as a whole. They don't charge you for it. They just ask you to create an account. So you just put an email address in, create a password, and then you're able to download and use that module. It was a really, really clean, good value. The other thing is that they support the ability to add any SIP trunk you like. And so one of the things that I've been playing with, I added my JMP account as a SIP trunk, as well as my Voxtelesys trunk. And so now I have the ability to take incoming calls or receive calls through my FreePBX system. So for about the last month, I've sent all of my calls through this system. Basically what I did was I set up one extension and I called it Noah's Endpoint, and I signed my phone into it, I signed my laptop into it, I signed all the things into it, and then I forwarded everything else, JMP, my stuff for Altispeed, every phone number where somebody would try to reach me, I forwarded it all into this FreePBX system and sent it all to that one single Noah's Endpoint, just to see how is the quality, how do things work, where are the shortcomings, that sort of thing. So the first shortcoming or the first problem that I ran into is mobile clients. SIP on mobile sucks. It just does. And I want it to be better, and it's not, and it's frustrating. LinPhone works if you're on the right network or you have the right things in place. But I was at Marriott hotels. There's a couple Marriott hotels that I've been at that no matter what I do, I cannot seem to get LinPhone to connect. I've tried VPN. Actually, that's not true. I did eventually get it to work. The way that I got it to work was I had to set up a VPN server in which I forced all of the OpenVPN traffic through the tunnel. So it wasn't allowed to selectively route. Everything had to go through the tunnel, and then I could get LinPhone to connect. But, that adds the additional complexity of now I'm sending all my traffic back through a VPN tunnel. And if the internet's fine, that should not be a problem. But if the internet's not that great, making an extra stop all the way in Grand Forks before it continues on to the SIP provider isn't really an excellent solution, but it functions. As a way to work around some of this, I have been using a mobile client called Bria. Bria is not an open source SIP client, but what they do is they have a service that runs where it stores your SIP username and password in their system, and they keep a client logged in for you, and then it sends an active push notification down to your phone when you get a phone call, and it significantly cuts down on missed calls on mobile. Now, again, I'm trying to get away from my phone, my physical cell phone, so I'm less concerned about that, but it was an interesting way to work around the problem. I'm typically taking all of my phone calls on my laptop, and so far as I can tell, I haven't missed any of them. As long as it connects up to the SIP server and there's no network foolery going around blocking my traffic, it seems to work just fine. So I got JMP put in there. The second thing is I got my Voxtelesys trunk added. So Voxtelesys is, in my humble opinion, the best SIP provider out there for a couple of reasons. First of all, they are hands-off white glove if you need them to be. That is to say, I can hand a client off to them and say, this client needs a phone system, and then I don't really have to get involved. They bend over backwards for their customers. The other thing, top of mind for me when it comes to Voxtelesys, they answer the phone when you call. I can't count the number of times that I have had a client that has a system down, I have a question, it's 6 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock at night or whatever it is, we're past business hours, you pick up the phone and you call those guys and somebody is there to answer the phone and give you the answer that you need. So if you're going to bank your business on an IP phone system or on an IP trunk provider, Voxtelesys is the answer all day long and twice on Sunday. So I reached out to Voxtelesys. I'm like, hey, I'm sure you guys have heard of the 3CX thing. Do you have any plans to do anything other than 3CX? Nope, we don't. That's okay. All right. Second question. I'm going to go a different route because I'm not doing 3CX. This is ridiculous. However, will you support me? Yes, sir. Absolutely will support you. In fact, we've designed an entire video series that walks you through step by step on how to get your free PX system up and running with our trunk. So let us know what you want it to be and what the credentials are, and we will set all of that up for you. And then you just enter that into your thing and follow the video, put the things where we tell you to put the things, and it works. And sure enough, I follow their video, follow it step by step, and 5 minutes later, I had my Voxtelesys trunk up and running on free PBX, and I'm able to send and receive calls. So if you're a JMP customer and you've been playing around with that as a personal phone system, you can use that and you can just expand the power. That is to say, you could have one JMP account and you could have a number of extensions in your home. Every family member could place and receive calls through jmp.chat. If you're like me and you're using it as kind of your work cell phone, so that's the number that you give out to everybody as your cell phone number, you're receiving text through the Conversations app, you're receiving calls through it, you can set it up so that the calls come in via SIP, and you can add that as a SIP trunk to your free PBX system and take calls that way. So I'm interested to hear what works. I'm interested to hear what doesn't work. If you have experience, particularly in this area, I would love to hear from you live at AskNoahShow.com.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of June 23rd, 2024, here's the Linux and open source news. Emacs 29.4 is out. KDE Plasma 6.1 has been released. Darktable 4.8 is out. The Tor browser team has announced the release of version 13.5. OpenShot 3.2 has been released. The Raspberry Pi developers have added a new monochrome TV mode feature to Linux 6.11. Linux 6.11 will also enable Intel Battlemage GPU display support. The mLinux team has announced the release of mLinux 45.1. And Tails 6.4 is out. In security news, multiple threat actors, including cyber espionage groups, are employing an open-source Android remote administration tool called RaphaelRat to meet their operational objectives by masquerading it as Instagram, WhatsApp, and various e-commerce and antivirus apps. A now-patched vulnerability in Olama, a popular open-source project for running LLMs, can lead to a remote code execution, according to flaw finders who warned that upwards of 1,000 vulnerable instances remain exposed on the internet. In other open-source AI news, Meta has publicly released a new family of AI models called Chameleon, which are comparable to commercial tools like Gemini Pro and GPT-4v. Intel has released version 1.5 of their Linux NPU driver, their user space driver component for the Linux systems in enabling the neural processing unit found within Core Ultra Meteor Lake processors and newer. Apple researchers have released more than 20 open-source tools to improve text and image AI. Mozilla has started to roll out its first AI features in the latest Firefox Nightly. And lastly, in lunar news, researchers have developed Moon Index, an open-source software that allows the study of the lunar surface. With Moon Index, researchers from Constructor University and the National Institute of Astrophysics in Italy have developed an open-source software that for the first time gives scientists access to a free tool that creates science-ready products from the Moon Mineralogy Mapper to study the composition of the lunar surface.
You're likely to see a new version of KDE hitting your distro soon, with KDE Plasma 6.1 being released. KDE is becoming a super polished daily driver desktop. It is our standard issue at Altispeed. If you apply for a job, we hand you a cell phone and a laptop, or not a cell phone, a SIP phone and a laptop, and the laptop has Kubuntu installed. People brag on it for being customizable, but I'll be honest with you. My experience is, yes, it's absolutely customizable. If you go to change something, it's definitely there. But that's not what I really appreciate about it. What I appreciate about it, and I think what we should draw more attention to, is the fact that it comes polished out of the box. The decisions that are made default are incredible. Now, I think in the coming fall, as Cosmic comes out, now in my personal opinion, I think there's going to be some real competition to this. But at the moment, I think KDE is a no-brainer if you're looking for a daily driver desktop. One of the things that is new with KDE 6.1 is something called explicit sync. And effectively, what the software does is better directs when and how the graphics processor should render images to make them seen on the screen. Quote, this careful coordination helps prevent issues like screen tearing, which parts of your display show different frames of a video all at once. Now, it's all part of Plasma 6.1, so welcome to the smooth gaming experience under Wayland and an end to piles of artifacts on your desktop. It also brings triple buffering support for smoother animations for screen rendering and better support for Flatpak apps. My favorite thing is a new remote desktop page. If you go under System Settings, you have the ability to turn on and configure RDP remote logins, as well as a new hide cursor effect that will automatically hide the pointer after a short period of inactivity, which is for when you're watching video game or playing movies and videos and stuff like that. But the ability for a remote desktop, this is missing from Linux and has been for a very long time. Windows and macOS both have native ways for you to remotely control the systems, and both of them are very, very good. XRDP has been available on Linux for a long time, so the fact that KDE is integrating this directly into their desktop, I think, is a game changer. If you want to set up X2Go, it works great. It's fantastic. I have a computer that I use at a client where I wanted a persistent point of presence, and so my desktop sits there at that client, and when I need to do it, I'm typically working off my laptop, and so I just X2Go into it, and it works great. All my applications are running. That's what we did at Southeast Linux Fest to get OBS running on all the Linux-powered computers that were in the rooms, and we just had from Master Control the ability to X2Go into them and start and stop streams, all the things. Works great. However, A, takes a minute to get all that set up. B, the performance is good, but it's not going to work under Wayland because it relies on X. And so we need to solve this problem. And I think getting a way to do native remote desktop is fantastic. If we can find a way to make it work in Wayland, even better. But building that into the desktop environment as a native feature, I think is huge. The other thing that I like about using RDP, it's not uncommon to try to introduce a Linux box into a Windows environment by having it do one thing and then having people use that box to do that one thing. By enabling this via RDP, it means that you'll be able to remotely access that box from Windows. Now, could you still do that with X2Go? Absolutely you can, because there's an X2Go client for Windows. However, it isn't going to be the same as, hey, to get to this server, you use terminal services, you use this RDP shortcut. To do this, use that RDP shortcut. Now the Linux is just another RDP shortcut on the Windows desktops. The flip side is true. Windows boxes just become an RDP shortcut under Kubuntu. Native remote desktop page in the system settings. Absolutely fantastic. Hey, the music in my ears means we're out of time. I appreciate you joining us. You can catch the entire back catalog by going to podcast.asknoahshow.com. There you'll find not just this episode and the articles and references we used to put this show together, but you'll find the entire back catalog of the podcast. Start from episode 1, work your way up. If you want to keep up to date on the latest, follow us on Twitter. I'm at Colonel Linux. Steve is at Linux Evans. The show at Ask Noah Show. We're back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.